Hey guys, and welcome to the Tap and Go podcast, where we talk all things rugby with players, coaches, and pundits from across the world. Today, we are very lucky to have the El Professor for all you Money Heist fans out there of Irish rugby from 2001 to 2008, making him the longest serving coach of Irish rugby. Welcome, Eddie O'Sullivan. Eddie, how are you doing today?
Great, guys. Looking forward to speaking to you about rugby. I like talking about rugby, so let's get on with it.
Perfect. So, Eddie, we're going to start right at the start. So, obviously, rugby from 1995 turned from amateur to professional. So, what challenges did you find that you had to adapt, overcome to make sure that rugby stayed competitive?
Yeah, when I was involved with Ireland initially, I started back in basically 2000, Six Nations. We were in full professional mode then, but we had a really small staff. I thought for me, the biggest thing was that we needed to upscale our support system around the team. We didn't have specialist coaches. We didn't do a lot of video analysis. Our medical team was good, but it needed to be bigger, in terms of injury prevention. So my philosophy was, and I kind of took some of this from my experience in America, and I think Clive Woodward had started down that pathway in terms of appointing a larger staff. And at the time, what Clive was in that, it was poo-pooed as, it's going to be like American football, it's not going to work, there'll be too many voices, which is complete horse manure now. If you said it, people would laugh you out of the room. So Clive was ahead of the curve, and I've been in America, and I saw it up close in college football and stuff. So that was my starting point in terms of trying to give the players my ambition was, you give every time a player pulls on an Irish jersey and runs on the field, they have the best possibility of performing to the peak of their ability. So you had to put that support system around them. So we went from probably a support staff of about 5 or 6 when I took over up to 15 within a year. And that was a big step forward. Now, it was an adjustment for everybody. It was an adjustment for 15 people in a room trying to plan, a strategy to win a test game. It was an adjustment for players, multiple coaches talking to them. And it also meant that there was a lot of off-field work that went on that hadn't been before, like analysis work, individual analysis of the opposition, individual analysis of referees. So really drill down to every part of our game and see how can we get the best out of this? How can we maximize this? And that's an ongoing process. You're always reviewing it and trying to make it better. So for me, that was the first stepping stone into trying to drag the game into the professional era. So yeah, that was kind of my first kind of attempt to get Irish teams to think in that area of being very professional and trying to maximize every performance. And I thought the best way of that was put the best support system around them. So yeah, what's taken for granted nowadays was back then in the early noughties was kind of was groundbreaking, But to be fair, I have to say, in terms of rugby, I thought Clive Woodward was the first guy to go down that track,
Yeah, for sure.
Completely.
So on this topic of sort of support system and coaches, I was interested in sort of talking about the importance of the relationship between a head coach and an assistant coach. So you were the assistant coach to Warren Gatland in 2001, and then Declan Kidney was your assistant coach in 2003. And so all three of you, I guess, are really successful and bright sort of rugby coaches, but I guess sometimes it just didn't work out because of, I guess, philosophies and sort of styles. Do you mind if you talk quickly about the importance of relationships?
Yeah, and I think this is worth talking about because again, nowadays it wouldn't be really acceptable that when you're a head coach, you're totally responsible for everything that happens under your domain. So you are given basically the right thing to do is to select your support staff who's going to be able to help you. And of course, that means that you're responsible for that staff member. Then when you pick them, they've got to deliver. Back then, it wasn't that straightforward. I mean, there was a time, believe it or not, in rugby when coaches didn't even pick the teams. You're way too young to remember this, but they had a selection committee of 5 or 7 selectors who picked the team and then told the coach, that's how bizarre it was. I'm not going back that long. I'm going back probably 40 years. That was common. But so now we're 20 years into professionalism. It'd be insane to think that. So probably the strange thing about myself and Warren Gatland and Declan Kidney is that when I came on the Irish team, I really wasn't Warren's selection. He'd just come off really bad World Cup in '99. They were beaten in Lons. It was a disaster. It was a huge reaction to it, as you'd expect, because Argentina weren't rated at that time, which is probably a bit harsh because Argentina were on the cusp of becoming, a very powerful team. So losing to Argentina, he was in a bad place, and then I was kind of foisted on him, I think, And I guess that's never ideal because he then isn't picking his assistants. And in a similar way, when I was appointed, before I was appointed, I was asked, would I work with Declan Kidney? Would I have a problem? And, you know, what's the obvious answer when you haven't got a job yet? And I presume he was asked the same thing when he was asked, would he work with me? So Declan, again, was kind of, it was a union plan. This is the way they wanted it to work. But you think about it, you're kind of foisting people on each other. So there's always a chance that won't work, and maybe there's a better chance it won't work than a chance it will work. So that's difficult dynamic. And when you've got two coaches who maybe different philosophies, like, because when the staff I picked to work with me, I had talked to them about their philosophy, how they would work, did they mesh with my views in the game, how we communicate. All those things get kicked out the window when there's a staff member foisted on you, and it's an assistant coach. So yeah, that was difficult, I guess, for everybody involved. And it didn't really work out in some ways. You can say it did in others. But yeah, and I think that's the takeaway here. You know, you should let head coaches pick their staff, which is now common, but back then it wasn't.
So obviously one thing being a coach is your strategy, your tactics are very important. And one thing which I found amazing reading about recently was that in the 2003 Six Nations, that you tricked the Scottish side by leaving a note of fake line-out calls in the bin. And so during the fixture, Scotland got really confused and you dominated the line-out because they got it all wrong.
Yeah, it was a small thing really, but it was, back then there was, you had to be very careful. When you were training, teams were scouted, you know. It's all kind of gone now because there's so much video available and teams are analysed to death. But I remember I'd been there 2 years previous as assistant coach. It was the foot and mouth year when all the games for Ireland were delayed into the fall, into the autumn. Yeah. And we went to Scotland and we got whacked in Scotland. It was ugly, just really ugly, which was not unusual for Ireland going to Scotland to get whacked, because for 20 years up to the 2000, we got whacked by Scotland regularly. You know, that's turned on its head completely now. But anyway, that's by the by. But I remember there's a story went that we got scouted because we trained before that game on a Thursday in an open area, and I think we were scouted pretty sure because they shut us down. Everything we did, they knew what we were doing. And 2 years before that, there's a story that the Irish manager at the time, Donald Lennon, found two Scottish RFU employees in a shed out at training session. Were supposedly cleaning the shed, brushing the floor, you know, sweeping the floor during an Irish squad session. So it wasn't uncommon, so you had to be careful. Now, the funny thing about that is when I took over, we had changed our lineouts considerably because we had a really fantastic lineout coach in Niall O'Donovan, who's now the manager of Munster. He was my assistant coach then. He was a fantastic forwards coach. And I remember he was restructuring our lineup. We went to the World Cup in 2003 and we had the best lineup in the World Cup in 2003. We were the top performing lineup. But we were in Scotland for that. And we hadn't won in Scotland, I think, at that stage for like, oh geez, since Adam was a boy. It was like 20 years since we won in Scotland. We went to Murrayfield and it turned out the ground was frozen. Like all these stories, there's some sort of karma. The ground was frozen and we couldn't go to the field. So we had to go to a gym in the city to do lineouts. And we had all lineout calls and I just got this crazy notion. Just leave them lying around, you know. What? They're the wrong lineout calls. What's the worst thing could happen? So we were training in the gym and we left these lineout calls in the top for a refuse bin. We left. And then just for fun, we came back the next day to do a final session. And we said to the caretaker, well, geez, we were really worried. Look, and we left this bit of paper on the bin here. It's very important yesterday. Is it, you know, did anyone take it off? No, nobody's got that. He said, no, to be thrown out, you know. So we knew well they had it. So the next day, their defensive lineup was, they couldn't function because they were taking wrong cues. So it took pressure off our lineup. We won that game, actually. It was a big game to win in Murrayfield. But it's one of those things, you know, it was a bit of, I suppose, being a bit of devilment, as they say. And it kind of, I don't think it won us the game, but it was a nice one. It's
actually like an unbelievable story. So I guess that topic of the World Cup in 2003. So you lost to, was it France in the quarterfinals?
Yeah, we lost to France in the quarterfinals. It was a bizarre game because I remember the first 20 minutes of that game, we hadn't missed a tackle and we were 17-0 down because one try there was a penalty, obviously. There's always a penalty early in the game. You go 3-0 behind. Then there was a try they got with a cross kick to Emile Harry Nordique, and our winger had kind of kind of wandered off and left the station, you know, and we got caught out wide. It was the cross kick wasn't that common then, you know, it as it is now. But yeah, we got caught cold on that. But the other score was an intercept. And they ran 60 meters. So suddenly you haven't missed a tackle and you're 17-0 down. Quarterfinal of the World Cup. It's a long way back, yeah. And
Fine margins.
yeah, and no, the takeaway from that World Cup actually was that we kind of got bullied. You know, we weren't physically where we needed to be. And that was a big focal point in the next cycle, was trying to get up to speed physically. Because also that in the build up to that World Cup, we ended up playing England for a Grand Slam game in Dublin. And they physically dominated us. They were able to, you know, wear us down. And we hung in that game. That the scoreline in that game, you know, is really frustrating, because we were in that game with 20 minutes to go. It was a 1-score or 2-score game, and then the wheels came off and we got wiped out. And people look at the score and go, "You were whacked." Well, we were whacked for 15 minutes when we were just out on our feet, you know. So that was part of it. The takeaway from the 2003 World Cup, that we needed to beef up to compete, and that was certainly one of the things we were looking at going forward.
I found throughout your career with Ireland, you've lost by narrow margins quite a lot. So in 2004, you lost the Grand Slam to France, but still won the Triple Crown. 2006, it was France again, and it cost you the championship. And again, in 2007, it was France. As a team, how do you go about trying to like rectify the situation? Because obviously it became a pattern and a trend in your...
Well, I think what goes over people's heads, if you look at France in the noughties from 2000 to 2009, and you look at them from 2010 to 2019, so take those 2 decades. The French team that I was playing against were so much better than they are in the last 10 years. I mean, the stats don't lie. In the noughties, France won 5 championships.
Yeah.
And two of those were Grand Slams. In the teens, so from 2010 on, they won a Grand Slam in 2010, and they didn't win anything after that. It just went off a cliff. Their win percentage in the noughties was 72%, exactly the same as Ireland. Ireland and France had the same win percentage in the noughties, 72%. But we won 1 Grand Slam in 09 with Declan Kidney as the coach, but they won 2 Grand Slams and 3 championships. So, but their numbers dropped since 2010. Their percentage has been 52%. It's catastrophic. People say, "Well, how did that happen?" It's very simple. One guy, Bernard Laporte. Absolutely it. End of story. The French team under Bernard Laporte was a different animal. Like if you think about Laporte, French teams were historically very talented, very physical, very skilled, but you know, you didn't know what you were getting. But Laporte changed that dramatically. He changed a number of things. He changed 3 things that was very untypically un-French. He always picked his best team. He was a very smart selector. Whereas a lot of French teams before and after, they've often had crazy selection policies. You know, when you look back through it, they make 10 changes. They pick some guy who's 19 years of age or half in a 6-age game and think something good's going to happen. You know, they do these crazy things as part of the French, but Laporte was atypically French. The second thing is, the French discipline was always terrible. I mean, Laporte hammered him on discipline. The captain of France, the second row, I can never remember his name, famous second row player for Toulouse. He was captain of France, and he got a yellow card in the game, and he dropped him off the squad. So imagine dropping your captain because he got a yellow card, and that was to send a message: we're not going to play like this. And the third thing that he did is they played to a very structured game, very untypically French. So I think Laporte is a fantastic coach, and like. I wish he wasn't around when I was there, because we might have got another couple of championships. We lost, I think we lost England. We cost us a Grand Slam in 2003, France in 2004, France in 2006, and France in 2007. Yeah. But 4 championships by 1 game, 3 of them were France. And probably the sickener was we still could have won the championship in 2007, but they got this really controversial try at the end that nobody saw. We had won in Italy by 50, but you know, they're the margins. So I think Bernard Laporte, and here's the irony, which is worth taking note of. I think if I was having a bet on the next World Cup, I would pick France, because Laporte is the president of France. Yeah. And he went on a political kind of I suppose it was a journey to make sure he became president, because I think in Laporte's mind, and I have huge respect for the guy, he's a very shrewd politician. He got himself elected as the president of French rugby. So the last World Cup, 19, Laporte didn't really care about it. Like, oh, things go well, they don't go well. But he's dialed in for the next one, 23. They're at home. He's going to try and win the World Cup in 23 that he lost back in 07. And if you think about it, they did the hard work in 07. They came through the hardest side of the draw. You know, they had to beat New Zealand to get there. They had to, South Africa got a really cushy draw. But unfortunately, England were actually an Achilles heel for France right through that Laporte time. So Laporte is on a mission to win the World Cup. They didn't win in 07. So I think that's pretty ominous for everybody, because France always have the ability to do this. You know, they just have the talent and they've got the athletes. So I think if you go back to my time, Laporte was my nemesis, to be fair to him. And I have huge respect for that, because he's a brilliant French coach, and he will have a huge impact on French rugby going forward for sure.
Yeah. So I just want to talk about. Sorry. Yeah.
No, you go, Matt.
So I just want to talk about, I guess, two players in particular in the sort of Irish setup between you there. So one being Paul O'Connell and the second being Brian O'Driscoll. And they both had sort of immense sort of influence on the team in terms of leadership. And I guess they were just phenomenal players on the field as well. How were they sort of looked at amongst the squad members and the influence they had?
Well, they were very different captains. So I guess I made Brian captain when he was very young. I got a lot of criticism for it, because he was a little bit immature, but you could see that leadership ability in him, because he always, like, the one thing that leaders have is they have huge respect within the team. Well, you know, people outside might not see that because they're not training with them, they're not playing with them. But you have to have that sense of everybody believes in you. And when you come to O'Connell and O'Driscoll, that was never in question for the players. But they were very different captains, I said. Brian was a kind of guy who was quiet. He was pretty soft-spoken. He picked his moments to speak. He wasn't an in-your-face type captain. Yeah. Because Paul was very much on the other end of the scale. I mean, I don't know, guy, if you follow soccer, but we've a pretty iconic soccer player in Ireland called Roy Keane, who is regarded as, you know, he's a big personality. He doesn't suffer fools. He takes people on, and he played his game like that. Paul is cut from that same cloth. I'm not saying he's exactly like Roy Keane, but he's cut from the same cloth. You know, guys were afraid to make mistakes when Paul's around, because he would jump on you like. Now Brian's the same but a different style. So two very different guys, but what they both had is the following, which makes you a captain. One, huge respect among their peers, like when they were on the field. And the funny thing, they were on the field together. The leadership was about not who was in charge, but how we could get the team across the line. So even when Paul and Brian were on the field, which was great, because the more leaders you've on the field, the better. That England team that won the World Cup in 03, that was just dripping with leaders. So my ambition was to have as many leaders as possible on the team, but I had two really good guys in them, and they worked very well together, even though Brian was more or less the captain all that time. But having said that, I think they had huge respect. The other thing was they were fearless. Like they just didn't talk the talk. Like they walked the walk. Like they would run through a brick wall. I remember one game in Paris, and the two of them, we had I forget year, I think it might have been 08. Was it 08? Yeah, we had this thing in Paris. We did it 2 years in a row there, as we let France get about 25 points ahead and then try to reel them in. Like we made enough mistakes. We made enough mistakes in the first 40 minutes that you could make in a season, like 2 intercepts. Like I just was watching the game through my fingers. In fact, it's a funny story. My assistant coach, Niall O'Donovan, said to me during it, like it was just chaos. He said, "This is like a nightmare." And I said, "Well, if you wake up, let me know, because I'm having the same one, you know." And it was so. But two guys, funny. Brian got this really, really bad dead leg. He got hit on his knee, just above his knee, and you know, all the blood was flowing down, and his leg was swelling up. And I remember the doctor went on and said, "Oh, he's done. He's cooked. He has to come off." It's 20 minutes in, like, "Oh, hell's breaking loose." And I said, "Well, what does he think?" And he says he doesn't want to come off. And I said, "What do you think?" "I think he should come off." I said, "Well, what does he think?" He said he doesn't want to come off. I said, "Listen to the captain." I said, let him play on. So that was my kind of way of asking the medic to cool down a bit. And we said, see how he goes. He played for the rest of the game. He played for an hour with a dead leg. I mean, his leg was a mess. Like, he so much blood after dripping or running down into the lower part of his quadricep. So he ran through that game, and we nearly won the game. We came back and only won the game. The other same story, 5 minutes into the second half, Paul O'Connell was taken off the side of a rock and popped his AC. So his AC joint was sticking up. Yeah. And again, like, the pain of that is horrendous. And he wouldn't come off. He just played on for 35 minutes with his AC separated. And he didn't just run, like, you know, some guys run around filling gaps. He was carrying ball. He was making tackles. So that sort of physical toughness was there. So huge respect, really tough guys, like, just wouldn't back down. And then the other thing was mental toughness, which is different again, because these guys, the bigger the occasion, the more they embraced it, which is kind of runs against normal thing. Like, the more pressure you're under, you know, the quieter a lot of people go, the less they project. And you need these guys. Like, when you're under your posts with 10 minutes to go and you've just given away a penalty to lose the lead, who's going to talk up here and get us out of this hole? So under pressure, these guys were tremendous. So I've been lucky. I've dealt with Keith Wood as well, who's cut from the same cloth. Fantastic leader. Physically very tough. You know, very smart player, and then mentally incredibly tough. Big occasions, just embraced them. So I guess, you know, having worked with those guys, I was very fortunate, and that was the thing I think that makes them different, is that capacity, those 3 key qualities that makes the difference between good and great. That's my take on it.
And obviously, you went on the 2005 Lions tour, and so what? Obviously, O'Driscoll spear tackled, and what was it?
Yeah.
The 3rd minute. What sort of effect would that have had if he was ruled out for the tour? What sort of effect would that have on the whole team mentality to lose a leader, arguably one of the best players?
I think it shook everybody when he got taken out like that. But let's be honest, that wasn't why we lost the tour. You know, the tour was in big trouble. And again, like, I go back to Clive, who was the coach. Clive, I knew Clive going back when he coached the England under-20s. I was the Irish under-20s coach. He was a very innovative guy. Thinks outside the box all the time. I love that. You know, I really like talking to Clive. He's very engaging, and we've had good discussions about rugby. And like, we'd slag each other because if I came up with something he hadn't thought of, used to piss him off. He just always looking for an angle, you know. And I always thought that was brilliant. And I think he took that tour on the basis that like, people again forget history, but the tour before that in 2001 was a shambolic tour of Australia that they nearly won, to be honest. So you could say it wasn't shambolic because they nearly won it, but there was a lot of unhappiness. There was a lot of stuff in the media, players speaking out about how they weren't looked after. And that was a very small coaching staff. Graham Henry was the head coach. Don Lennon was the manager. And they nearly won the tour, so I probably should take back with shambles. It wasn't. But in terms of the players, they were very unhappy. A lot of the players, they felt it was a them and us. The Wednesday team weren't looked after. There was a lot of blowback around that, and there was some of the players went into the media and threw the coach under the bus. So it wasn't a happy tour by any means. So New Zealand was next, which is the toughest tour. And Clive said, okay, let's come at this differently. Let's try and make sure that everybody gets looked after. And his logic was really good, but he went and brought 2 squads, 2 coaching staffs. Like, it was huge. I mean, it was just so unwieldy. And my sense is it was going to be very difficult to keep this on track. This massive, you know, it was like just a huge ship with everything going on everywhere. Because we were in Villa Glamorgan prepping to leave, and geez, it was so unwieldy. You know, the training sessions were running over. We had 2 buses going to training. Meetings were long. It was very hard to get your arms around it. And I think that was always going to be difficult. So in retrospect, there was a lesson learned that, yeah, in theory, you double everything and everybody is looked after, but it doesn't work like that. It gets too unwieldy. And then the second thing was, tactically, there was a lot of talk. I did a podcast a couple of years ago before the Lions tour with Matt Dawson and Tom Shankland for BBC, and they were talking about how they felt left out in the team. The Wednesday team were looked after and all that. And I didn't agree with them, and I had gone through it. One of the things Clive wanted was make sure everybody was included. So what you do on Lions tour is you spend the first couple of weeks and you let everybody, you know, lay out their cards, and then you try and get a test side, put it together and see is it the right test side. So what changes from there on is somebody gets injured or somebody loses form or somebody plays their way in. but you kind of have a good idea after a couple of weeks what your test side is. Clive had a different philosophy. He felt he could keep changing the team Wednesday, Saturday, Wednesday, Saturday, and then come the week before the test, put our best chips on the table. And I think that meant we didn't build units within the team. We didn't build back row. We didn't build this front five. There was a lot of moving parts that weren't locked together.
Completely.
So and if you look at the selections, selections changed all the time. Even in the test series, apart from the injuries, Brian Driscoll's included, we made bundles of changes. So we never got a settled side together. And it was an environment where there was a large operation, lots of people going different directions, became very unwieldy. And you're playing the hardest team in the world to beat at home. So yeah, the odds were, if it went wrong, we'll go badly wrong. And unfortunately it did. And I respect what Clive was trying to do. And the thing that struck me is that for a guy who won the World Cup less than 2 years earlier with England, he's brought the Webb Ellis Trophy north of the equator for the first time. The British media, man, they were just waiting to pounce on him. They pounded the crap out of him. Now, I guess he didn't help himself. He brought in Alistair Campbell, you know, and Alistair's a great guy, but I think Alistair is a very good, you know, he's a great political advisor, no doubt about that, but I think he not so much he was out of his depth, but he wasn't sure where he was with the rugby side of things. And I think the media just took that as some sort of an affront, and that was it. The gloves were off from the start. So when things started to go wrong, the media just weighed in, and he got a terrible kick. And I just couldn't believe that a guy had done so much for English rugby, got such a kick in the English press 2 years after he won a World Cup. But just can't tell you how the press worked. But there was things like that resonate you, which was 15 years ago, and it's still in my head. The other things that jump out at me.
Yeah. So obviously you coached the USA Eagles in the 2011 World Cup. So what would you say are the biggest differences between coaching the USA, which is a more sort of developing rugby nation, and Ireland, which is a very dominant sort of already there?
Well, it was my second trip to America. I coached the assistant coach in '99, but so that trip in '99 was really helpful in knowing what to expect in back in 2009. Yeah, look, it's an amateur team. You know, it's just an amateur team. It's just a completely different. It's like being coach of Europe. It's a huge country. It's 50 states. You know, players from Hawaii to Boston, from Seattle to Florida, everywhere in between. All amateur guys working jobs. Some of them, the thing that I respected, one of the things, I have a lot of respect for American rugby. One of the things that was how these guys would say they wanted to go to a World Cup and say, I want to play rugby for the Eagles in the World Cup in 2011 in New Zealand. They just put their life on hold for 4 years. And I mean, career, family, everything. They can't apply for jobs on them. They can't take promotions in their jobs if they have them. Some which is just work job to job. And they come into camp then for these blocks of time, like a Churchill Cup at the time, or we had an autumn tour at one stage, or we had this and that, or whatever was going on. And these guys just gave up their job and came into camp. And we gave them a per diem, which is a few bucks every day. And here's the really sad thing, which people wouldn't know, is you come into camp today, or you give up your job, whatever you're doing, working in construction or whatever, come into camp today, you come training and you hurt your shoulder. And then I send you home and you're out of work. You can't take a job or your shoulder's injured and no one's paying you. You just literally have no income. So these guys went through incredible, commitment to get on the plane to New Zealand. There were some guys played overseas, but we didn't have that many. So I knew this going in, this is how it works. And what you're trying to do is you're always looking for new players, recruiting them. You're always fighting with budgets to get them into camp and develop them. And then you're trying to convince them that they have a chance of actually making progress. But I always found that the sense of enthusiasm, these guys was off the charts. Like, they were the easiest guys in the world to motivate. They were trained. There was no, professional players sometimes they get awful edgy, like they training, and you're supposed to train for 75 minutes, and when you run to 80, players start complaining, we're 5 minutes over and we want to get off our feet. And these guys just trained. It got dark. They didn't care. Like, they were so happy to be in camp. So to me, I knew going in, this is what I was getting. I was getting amateur guys with an incredibly professional attitude that would just run through a wall of you. So I loved it. It's just brilliant dealing with these guys, and I still keep in touch with some of those guys, and they're fantastic. And then what happens is all these guys, they finish World Cup and they just get on with their life. A lot of them just retire and try and start a career, but they're starting when they're 28. Everyone else is 8 years in front of them. So yeah, it's a different job, completely different job. budgets are very tight. Everything has the cost of the gate rate has to be factored in. There's no sponsors running after you. Because in America, rugby is still a tiny sport. It's got potential, but people keep thinking there's a silver bullet here, and rugby's going to become huge.
You talk about that potential, and obviously you say it's rugby. It's a big thing in the news about because they're trying to launch the MLR, and at the moment they've got like the Bastareaux's gone over there, but it's still quite like the MLS where players are going at the end of their careers just to make a bit of money.
Yeah, like they did in soccer back in the day. That's what happened in soccer.
But do you think it's got potential to attract young stars like the which are in the Premiership and Super Rugby at the moment?
The problem is there's a couple of models being proposed in America, and the one at the moment that the MLR is a kind of a slow burn model where they're starting and they're trying to grow all these franchises and get more television and get more money. But where they are now is they're semi-professional. So they train a couple of nights a week and they do gym work and stuff, but they're not full-time professionals every day. They're not on the training field at 11 in the morning. All these guys have jobs. And even the guys who come in from overseas, they've got to supplement their income somehow. And then again, the season is so short. So that's one model. And the problem with that model is that for the people who own these franchises, it's costing them money. I mean, I think the burn on these franchises, I'm going back a year ago, I was talking to somebody who owns a franchise and they're losing $3 million a year.
Yeah.
Not a huge amount of money, but again, it's not pocket change. And it may take 7-8 years for these franchises to start becoming valuable. You could run through 12 or 15 million bucks in debt before you start making a profit. Now, all it takes is if you've got 7 or 8 franchises and 4 of them go off the rails financially, that's the end of the league. So it's a fairly high risk. Now, the other model that's been talked about, and there's a guy at the moment, I ran a combine for them back in, I think 2 or 3 years ago in Minneapolis, where they're trying to get big money in at the front end, massive investment, and then they will go out and harvest the best players in the world, come to America and put this massive product on. And that's a different model, but they're talking about raise seed money of maybe 50, 60 million at the front end. And then the product goes in like this finished product practically, world-class players playing, and they attract, because the thing about rugby in America, rugby has got a lot of players, a lot of supporters, but it's a community. It's a small game in a big country. There's no tipping point in rugby in terms of its footprint in sport in America until non-rugby people start watching it, right? And that's the tipping point. Very hard to do.
I just can't see that happening against the NFL as well. The NFL is just too big there.
There is a window for a contact sport, because after the NFL stuff, contact sport after that is basketball, or ice hockey, So there is probably a little wriggle room, but how do you get Americans to start watching rugby seriously? And that's the tipping point. But it's not going to work. Like at the moment, it's fine, but the growth rate is very slow, and that's how the model is built. But if you're going to have a tipping point in rugby, then the rugby community in America are not going to turn into a professional game. It's the American public have to embrace it. So how do you get non-rugby people in America to embrace rugby? That's the trick. And, there's different way to skin the cat, but there's risks in all of them. There's no non-risk way of doing this.
That's really interesting. Thank you.
So for like the last minute of the podcast, we always ask our guests what their number one highlight throughout their career in, I guess, rugby is. What would yours be?
From a coaching point of view, I've had a couple of good days. I guess for me, it's the game against England in Croke Park in 2007. Yeah. Because historically in Ireland, that was a huge game. There was a lot of historic, I don't know if you've read the history around that, but it was a pretty historic day. So the reason for that is that was a game that Ireland couldn't lose historically. All right. So, everyone says you can't lose this game like it's a Grand Slam game. Yeah, you can say that, but there's 6 Nations again next year. If you lose this year, maybe you get a chance next year. But this is a one-off first game against England in Croke Park, very historical venue. Yeah. And yeah, we won that game. I would have taken 1-0 before, but it went better than that. So I was very happy with that game for a simple reason is that from a coaching perspective, you go out and you have maybe 5 or 6 kind of bullet points or goals you need to achieve to win the game. You think if you tick these boxes, you'll win. And sometimes you maybe tick 4 of them and you still win. But I don't ever remember a game where you have your 6 or 7 things you want to do, and you come back and you've done them all. And you go, geez, yeah, that was an easy post-match review. Everyone did everything they should do. There's no going back and saying we should have done this better. And when you feel the amount of pressure the team was under that day to get a result, that we ticked all the boxes under that pressure. That's my point. I was really, really satisfied with that for the players, because they were under humongous pressure. They kept their focus, and we lost to France 2 weeks earlier in the last minute in the first game in Croke Park. But this one was even more pressure, and under the pressure, they ticked all the boxes for me. And the result then was no doubt about the result. We kind of cruised home on it. So that was, for me, it was a great, enjoyable day for all those reasons.
Wow. I mean, Eddie, thanks so much. I think that's about all we've got time for.
Yeah,
but I mean, I'm sure Matt will agree with me. That's been so insightful and just a really interesting chat.
Well,
really
I love talking rugby, so maybe talk again sometime.
Yeah, we'd love to. That was really, really enjoyable. And then can I just thank everyone else for tuning in, listening again, and we will see you next week. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Come on!